Don't know why you left me bleeding. With a broken heart, tell me if I deserve this feeling. I thought that you know that we had something special till you end up all this way. Please tell me why you left me bleeding. With a broken heart, tell me why I deserve this feeling. I thought that you loved me, I thought that you need me till you end up all this way. Have you forgot all the moments while we had was so true? This world was made for two. I did it Feelings change and love can go, but tell me why are you so cold? What did I wrong? What was the fault? Or what you say is I don't know. Feelings change and love can go, but tell me why are you so cold? What did I wrong? What was the fault? I thought that you loved me, I thought that you need me till you end up all this way. Have you forgot all the moments while we had was so true? This world was made for two.
Hey all, and welcome back to Fuzzy Dutchy Gaming, and another build on the channel. I've seen loads and loads of people having lots of fun with Heatshiver Helmet, so I thought I'd give it a go. There's been lots of guides come out from people for various different Ascendancies, but I like playing Raider, so I've decided to put it onto a Raider. In all honesty, it's probably more expensive than Lightning Strike and not quite as good, but there's a fun factor of this build that you don't get on Lightning Strike, and you don't have to worry about projectiles being blocked. So none of this build is particularly original. A lot of the ideas have been in place all league with Heatshiver and utilizing a few uniques and passives on the Atlas tree, but I hadn't seen anyone bring out a detailed guide for Raider, so I thought I would do so. So what content can this build complete? So for the more difficult content, the only thing I'm going to say difficult content, I'm ignoring Simulacrum because I think with cold resistance and ailment avoidance, it's not really possible to do Simulacrum because it's going to be RNG as to what waves you get. The only content you're going to struggle with is sort of max 5 Deli Orb farming, which you could probably do it, to be honest. I've done 4 Deli Orb maps up to like 12 or 13 rewards, and it's been fine. I haven't done sort of super juice though, because it's not really what I've built the character for. But for uber bosses, you can't freeze them, or I can't with the damage that I've got. Now, you know if you're freezing bosses because your Trinity is going to proc, and it's a lot of the damage on the build. And we'll come on to Heat Shiver in a moment in the interactions, but quickly, you gain 100% of cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies. And you get that, it means your Trinity is going to proc because you're doing about the same cold as you are doing fire. In Uber bosses, that wasn't proccing, as you can see here. The damage was still, considering Trinity is a dead link in this, and you're not getting your 100% extra as fire, the damage was still okay. I'm just not sure of a way to get it Uber boss viable without getting like 50, 60 million DPS and brute forcing Trinity to proc. But on the Feared, as you can see from the highlights, there's no problem proccing Trinity. I'm just not very good at the fight. And on the attempt I did, I was a little bit unlucky getting Shape It and Exile straight away, because with this build to do damage, you need to get your frenzy charges up to get Ice Bite going, just to get your attack speed and get your damage up. And I found it very difficult to find a window to do DPS. And I basically took a stupid death right at the beginning. And once you're out of this fight, getting back in is really difficult, especially with two bosses that just litter the floor with AoE. I'm sure a decent player would easily be able to do the Feared because the DPS is easily there. I'm just not very good, and it's not really what I'd recommend doing if you want to build this sort of character. But all the other content I did Height of Hubris invitations where they're all released at once, and I did the one that doubles the effect of the mods on the maps, and they were absolutely fine. It's just Uber bosses at this stage are a no-no. You need, I would think, quadruple the DPS, which is going to cost mirrors, I would think. And the Feared, although it's doable, I'm not very good at it, so it's not something I would attempt on the build. So let's talk about the key interactions and items on the build. Before we go over the gear and links bit by bit and the skill tree, I'm just going to explain how the build works, because if you get any of it wrong, you're going to be really, really gimping your DPS. So the build revolves essentially around Heat Shiver. What this helmet does is you gain 1% of cold damage as extra fire damage per chill effect on an enemy. You're going to get 30% chill effect on enemies. And if you freeze them, you get 100% of cold damage as extra fire damage against frozen enemies. So just be aware that when you are doing bosses, they won't physically freeze in terms of what you see on the screen, but they can be frozen. They just can't have their action speed lowered to nothing. So as I say, if Trinity procs, you're very, very likely to be freezing unless you've got a ton of extra fire damage somewhere on your build. So the way it works is this helmet generates the majority of our damage, and then you're using Yoga Suffering because all your elemental damage shocks, and you also get increased damage for each ailment type that you inflict on them. And we're going to inflict Chill, Shock, and Ignite. So we're doing an absolute ton of elemental damage. So you're going to be getting 50% shock effect on the majority of monsters. We're running Legacy of Fury boots. They're just a massive DPS boost to the build because nearby enemies are scorched with increased effect. And obviously 100% of our cold damage is turning into fire damage. So it just adds a ton of DPS. Other than that, the rest of the gear is rare gear. These are the kind of key build items you need to get it going, with a couple of notes on the skill tree. We will run through the skill tree in detail in a second. I just want to point out how important some of the nodes are, because without taking specific nodes on the tree, against tough enemies, you're probably not going to be freezing them. So we're getting increased effect of non-damaging ailments here. We're getting increased effect of non-damaging ailments here. We get 60% increased freeze duration on enemies, which is massively important because when they're frozen, we're doing tons more damage. We take 50% increased effect of non-damaging ailments when we crit, and we're 100% crit. And then 40% increased effect of non-damaging ailments here. So as you can see, that's a massive boost to the ailment damage and effect. And you realistically need all of those things in place to get the build going. Now, I've seen some people also run a medium cluster, but I don't have the levels to do it yet. I'm only level 95. You can get a medium cluster duel with the ailment effect, so you can increase that effect even more. So at the moment, I've got anointed Savagery for an extra frenzy charge because we get loads of extra damage from frenzies. But I think what I'll probably do if I want to do tougher content is anoint Fingers of Frost, because it's 30% chance to freeze enemies which are chilled. That doesn't really matter. We do that anyway. The important thing is 30% increased duration of cold ailment. So freeze is a cold ailment, so we're getting even more duration on freeze. And then increase effect of cold ailment. So in those spots where we're either not quite freezing or not quite reaching max chill, this is going to fix that. It's going to lower the overall DPS when you're mapping, but it really doesn't need it. And they're kind of the key parts of the build in terms of the tree. And then there's a couple of fight for survival jewels, which we'll go through in a bit. So in terms of gear, the rest of the gear is really up to you, depends on your budget. I've decided this is going to be the build I want to plow all my currency into. So I'm running a Circle of Fear. These aren't expensive unless you want specific implicits. So I think I paid a Divine for mine because both the implicits are actually decent to the build. They have more damage. But you want to increase cold damage while affected by Herald of Ice. And Herald of Ice has increased buff effect. You can also put Turbulent Catalyst on this, 20%, and it increases both of those mods. For your Stygian, you're just looking for life resistances and whatever you want to put into the build. And then with your jewel, you're just looking to get something that adds damage. This jewel isn't particularly good. This is one I carried over from a Lightning Strike character, but you'd basically want to stack damage on your jewel, or if you're slightly missing on resist or attributes, you could get that there. The gloves are typical melee. They are additional enemies +2. And then I've gone accuracy per frenzy charge because you don't quite cap accuracy if you don't have it anywhere. This could be spell suppression if you needed it. And then here you're looking to stack damage. So I bought a fractured pair of attack speed gloves, and then I've crafted global crit chance and LE damage if you crit recently, which is always. And then your jewelry, really, your ring is going to be, if you can get damage, great. If not, this is where you're going to get your life and resistances. And then the body armor is totally up to you. This is one I passed over from my Tornado Shot character. It's just life resistances. And then I've crafted Fizz taken as LE because when we go onto the auras, I don't run any sort of Fizz mitigation on the build. But you could do whatever you want with this chest piece. You can make the chest however you want to fit into the build. And then I've gone for melee hits have 11% chance to fortify. I can boost that up because I think that's only a grand implicit. And then increased effect of non-curse auras. As I said, I don't run any Fizz mitigation, so fortify is really important just to lower overall damage that I take. The shield, this is where you want to pick up some spell suppression. 19% is optimal because that means you can get on the tree, you can take the smaller suppression wheel instead of the larger one. So normally you would go here. Obviously, if you had an amazing Lethal Pride node there, you could go there. But I only wanted to do these 3 nodes here and free up nodes to take elsewhere. And then the claw, what you're looking for ideally is a ton of cold damage, a ton of fizz, attack speed, crit chance, and pen. All I did, this claw could be better, but buying claws are super expensive. They were expensive anyway. Now that no one's playing the league, they're even more expensive. And the claw I want doesn't actually exist. The closest one to it is 75 divines, and it maybe gives me a 10% increase in DPS, which unless I decide I want to try and get this Uber boss in or feared clearing, there's not really much point doing it. But the stats you're looking for are, ton of cold damage, either fire or fizz damage, attack speed, crit chance, and then LE pen. All I did was bought a fractured base, fairly cheap. As you can see, it's a gut ripper. It's not like the meta Imperial Claw, but they were like 10 divines for a fractured base, and I didn't want to pay it. So this claw, I think, only cost me 2 divines to craft. And then the shield, I said I've bought a fractured spell damage shield, and I've rolled this in harvest with fire, cold, or lightning until I've hit my ailment avoidance of 30 or more, and then that sorts that out because we're a raider. For flask, it's up to you. You really don't need to run a Quicksilver because you're going to be whirling blades everywhere. So I run Onslaught, Jade, Diamond, and Sulfur. And then for my suffixes, I have attack speed, crit chance, evasion, and then reduced effect to curses. You could have something like chance to not be stunned here or something like that. It's totally up to you, but I would definitely recommend the other 3. And then if you wanted to build this as a budget, just cut out the fancy bits. Don't worry about rolling your implicits. Like this cost me a fortune. It cost me like 4 divines to roll 45 because it just wasn't playing ball. Again, you don't need the implicits on this ring. You could just go for a normal one. The rest of the gear craft, fairly cheap. Heatshiver is cheap. The only issue you might have is getting an anointment on it. There's not many available. The one I wanted wasn't there, so I settled for Herald of Ice mana reservation efficiency because it means I can run more auras without having to push my Enlighten up to a level 4. So we'll go through all of the gems. So in terms of auras, I'm running Hatred, Grace, Herald of Ice, and Precision. Now, a lot of people say you are going to get absolutely squished every map you run because you've got 900 armor and 22k evasion. But once we've got our frenzy charges in place and flasks up, our chance to avoid is about 93%. So 7 out of 100 attacks are going to hit me, the rest of them aren't. We've also got, obviously, inherent block from a shield, which is 24%. So on 7 of those 100 that get through, 1 in 4 are going to get blocked. And you're going to be avoiding telegraphed hits anyway. So the likelihood is, if you get hit by a attack, it's not going to kill you anyway. Then the evasion entropy reset. I did try running determination. It's your choice. You can run determination. There's no reason that you have to run grace. But because Raider Ascendancy gives you tons of boost to evasion, grace gives you much more benefit than determination. I know a lot of people just don't like running evasion builds. If that's the case, you can run determination. But what you'll end up with determination with your flasks up is probably, unless you really min-max and you gear 15 to 20k of each. This, as I say, goes up to like 45, 50, 60k with frenzy charges. And with Fortify, Elusive, Fist Taken, I'm rarely dying unless I'm doing, like bossing content or Uber boss attempts that I've done, which I know I'm going to die in. I've leveled up pretty comfortably to 95, and I don't really need to push it anymore. And I have tested out determination. That is what I ran originally. And I had sort of 15k, 20k armor and 15k, 20k evasion. But I found that that amount of armor still doesn't really do much against big hits. So there's not much point having it. If we're going to avoid nearly every hit anyway, I'd rather avoid 93 hits than avoid 60 hits when I know any of those 40 hits that I don't avoid could kill me, even with armor. I just think Grace is the better option for sort of a mapping type character. We have Precision for obviously crit chance and accuracy. Hatred, which scales tons of our cold damage. And then Herald of Ice, which actually with all the auras and buffs we get, Herald of Ice is a big damage boost. In most builds, you say don't run it, it's a meme. It just gives you effect and looks really cool. In this build, it does do damage. So we'll just go in here and I'll quickly go through the rest of the gear because I forgot to mention the jewels that I'm running in the build. As I say, I've spent a lot on this. You don't have to go as far as this if you just wanted something to have some fun mapping. And at the end of the video, I'm going to go through a very budget version and I'll demo what it looks like. If you just wanted to have some fun, you wanted to spend a few divines without breaking the bank. So I've got a large cluster jewel that is always my go-to on Ellie builds, which is Sadist, Storm Rider. And the third doesn't matter, you just need one. We're not going to take that one. Sadist gives you increased damage if you've chilled, ignited, or shocked, and we're going to do all three. And that is 60% increased Ellie damage. So Storm Rider gives you cold damage against shocked enemies with shocking with Yoke of Suffering. Increased lightning damage doesn't matter, but what is important is 10% chance to gain a power charge when you shock a chilled enemy. Obviously it is 10%, but I've never noticed them ever dropping off. I've just got a normal Crimson Jewel just to stack as much damage as I can on it. So it's crit multi, crit multi, crit multi, and bleeding. Doesn't matter, it's just 3 lots of crit multiplier. The Watcher's Eye was not that expensive. I think it was a divine or 2, which is cold damage while affected by hatred and chance to evade attacks while affected by grace. And that is just a flat 7%. So the way evasion works, the more you get, the much harder it is to increase your percentage. This works really well because it basically just buffs it. So I've got to 84%. Even if I've got loads more evasion into the build, it's probably only up to like 85. This just adds 7% to it. And then I'm running 2 Fight for Survival jewels. So they're not amazing jewels, they're just cheap. So they add 6% damage, essentially. And if we look at this Crimson Jewel, that's about the same, and this cost me quite a few divines. Obviously, you can't get life and stuff on Fight for Survivals, but if you're stacking damage, you're not going to get life on a jewel anyway. And you can pick very cheap ones up with corruptions. So I picked up a Cannot Be Hindered for 10 chaos, I think. And then I picked up a Corrupted Blood one for 70 chaos. They're just an easy way to boost damage on the build. And then I've got a Lethal Pride jewel, which will run over the stats, but this isn't very good. I essentially needed some strength because I was a little bit short, and I wanted Intimidate and double damage. So this is not a super stacked Lethal Pride, and if I wanted to really push the damage up, I could go spending multiple divines on like a triple double damage Intimidate jewel. So it's got double damage. It's got strength, which I needed. It's got fire res, which always helps. Melee damage. Chance to intimidate on hit. And then burning damage, which does nothing. So we'll go back to the auras and why I run Herald of Ice. And if you actually take it off, it's a massive damage drop. It is 18.9% extra damage running Herald of Ice because the rest of the gear that we have on. So I mentioned the auras. I'll just go through where they're socketed because you do need an Enlightened level 3, which are dirt cheap at this stage of the league, to get this to work, along with some sort of mana reservation on your helmet. I've gone for Herald of Ice. You could go for Grace reservation. You could go for Hatred reservation, or you could go for damage, but I couldn't find any damage ones on the market. So if you're really serious about this build, pick what enchant works for you, and you're probably going to have to get a lab runner to get that for you at this stage of the league. If you aren't able to get any, what you'd probably do is instead of anointing Savagery, you'd anoint Sovereignty to get some more mana reservation, and you should be able to fit all the auras in. Here I have a Vile Haste just because I like it for mapping better than Vile War Chief, but if you just want single target damage, Vile War Chief is going to be your better option. I've got Culling Strike linked to an Ancestral Protector. Ancestral Protector gives a lot of attack speed on bosses, and cold just means that 10% the boss is going to die. Got Whirling Blades, not linked to anything. You get so much attack speed anyway, you don't need to link faster attacks to it. Withering Step on left click to reset elusive, and then Flame Dash when you get something on you that needs to break it with a blink skill, because Whirling Blades doesn't work for that purpose. Guard skill, you're kind of stuck. You don't have endurance charges to make the most of Mortal Call. You don't have any armor to use Molten Shell. So you've just got a simple steel skin, increased duration, casting damage taken. And this is where I also slot my last aura, which is Precision. And then the last lot is Mark on Hit, Assassin's Mark, and Inspiration. Inspiration just lowers the mana cost of Assassin's Mark. If you're really struggling, you could put Life Tap in here instead. And now to go through the 6-link. This is, I would say, the optimal 6-link, but you've got options in a couple of gems, but some of them are non-negotiable. So let's start with the main skill, Frostblade. So I brought a 20/20 for, I think it was a Divine. 20/20 is fine. I've got Awaken Multi-Strike. Normal Multi-Strike was what I used in the majority of that footage. I've only just got the currency to buy this. Awakened LE damage with attacks. Again, normal LE damage with attacks is fine. Trinity, Nightblade support, and then Ice Bite. Ice Bite is really important. It gives you more chance to generate frenzy charges when killing a frozen enemy. We get lots of buffs from that from our Ascendancy. This just makes it even better. You get extra cold damage, and you get extra cold damage per frenzy charge. So it's just a really, really good gem overall. Now I'm going to probably try and push this build even further because I'm really enjoying playing it. So it's going to be a case of buying 20/20 gems everywhere, because it does actually make a big difference, especially for Ice Bite and Nightblade. And we'll see how we get on. These boots, I would love to replace them. I just don't know whether I can. You can get rare boots with you drop Scorch Ground every 4 seconds. That could work, but you don't get the increased effect. But it would mean you could then get another implicit. You could get life on your boots. You can get some resistances. So it just makes the build a bit easier. But I really, really like these boots. I don't think I'm going to mess around changing them. So the only other thing, I looked at dropping this for a Bolt of Faith, but when I put all the details into POB, it was about a 1% damage increase on this flask because it's got 17% suffix. So it just didn't seem worthwhile. Bandits, kill all. Pantheons, totally up to you. Depends what you want to do. Brine King's pretty much wasted because we can't be frozen and we can't be chilled anyway. Solar Solaris is quite nice to avoid damage, but avoid ailments and critical strikes. We avoid ailments anyway. Element of damage, if you haven't been hit, is not too bad because we're evasion based. But I would only normally run Solaris when there's a single boss that I'm taking on. And then Solar Arcari is always nice. It's just a general good, take less damage across the board for stuff that normally you're lacking damage resistance on. But I like to run Lunaris. I haven't even fully upgraded this yet because I'm lazy. And then for mapping, I'm using Abarath because I'm always running Searing Exile. But if you're going into specific bosses, you might want to change it. So you could do something like Life Recovery Flask when you're in bosses that might take a while. In terms of the tree, there's not really that much to go through. It's probably easier just to look at the POB, but I'll just pick the Masteries out because all of them play an important part in the build. So I've got Grace Reservation, which I need to be able to have enough mana to attack. Crit Strike chance is increased by chance to suppress spell damage, which is 100%. 60% freeze duration, very important. Precision Reservation, again, needed. More ailment effect, very important. Again, more ailment effect. Nightblade Crit Multi, which is really important because it scales with elusive. And then again, Nightblade and Elusive Effect here. And then I've got 10% increase life. And if I get another point, it'll be 50% life there. They're the masteries in the build. There's honestly not much more to go through that I can think of. In terms of your Ascendancy, it's standard Raider Ascendancy, which is Quartz Infusion, Avatar the Veil, Wear the Poacher, and Avatar the Slaughter. So let's run through a more budget-friendly version of the build. If people just want to get this going on a few divines, I've just put some gear into PAB that's easily accessible, and I'll run through it and just go through a few important things that you can't scrimp on because it's going to basically half your damage. It's nothing expensive, it's just things that I see people never doing properly on builds. So, the claw, all I've done is attack speed, cold damage, crit chance, and an open prefix. You could either buy one of these, I would think, or get a fractured base that isn't a meta base and just use Deafening Essences of Hatred until you hit it. It will not cost you a lot to get that. The shield, again, I bought a spell suppression base. They're not expensive, like just nothing fracture-wise is expensive other than specific items. Doesn't have to be a lack of buckler. I just like it because it gets more evasion. If there was a much cheaper base for, say, 10 chaos, go for it. Doesn't matter. You just want to get spell suppression on there. And as I said, this is easily crafted in Harvest using the 50 cost craft of either fire, cold, or lightning. So I've left the body armor as it is. It's just a life and resistance armor with a craft. And then you'd obviously roll the implicits yourself. The gloves I'll drop down to strike 1 because it's obviously much cheaper than strike 2 enemies. If you can afford it, I would 100% recommend +2. It makes mapping a lot better. And again, you would just buy a fractured pair of gloves for dirt cheap and then just roll life essences on it until you hit something that you like. Bog standard Legacy of Fury boots. Yoga Suffering with Sovereignty. You could either anoint this yourself or buy it with it already anointed. I think when I was running this, it was 70 cows. I think I paid for it. I would just say when you're getting Yoga Suffering, spend a bit more to get one with higher resistances because it's not the easiest build to cap resistances on. The ring, I've essentially left it the same. What we will do actually, because this is quite a decent ring, is I'm just going to take out the damage. So you're now left with just a ring with some resistances and life. Circle of Fear, I've removed the implicit, so you've just got a normal Circle of Fear with these two mods, which is not expensive. Stygian Vise, life resistances, and then crafted LE damage with attacks. In fact, let's just make this a little bit fairer because open prefix might be expensive. We'll remove this. And then Murderous Eye Jewel, this is not even a good jewel, so you could definitely get better than this. The only other thing to point out, I've dropped the cluster jewels. And then for the Watcher's Eye, I've removed the Grace combination in case Grace mixed with Hatred is expensive. I've just left the cold damage by Hatred, which is about 30 or 40. See, it's not an expensive Watcher's Eye. And then Lethal Pride, I've just kept the same. Again, this wouldn't be too expensive to buy. So that still gives you 6.6 million boss TPS. But there's some things that make that damage massive. So the only thing I will point out is I've unticked Vile Haste because it's not going to be up all the time. But if you tick it in, obviously gives you a nice boost. Flasks are so important for damage. And a lot of builds will just throw any old flask on and not look at the suffixes on the flask. I could get better than this. Mine are quite lower tier, but it is quite hard to roll high tier flasks. So Silver Flask is obviously Onslaught. Life doesn't do anything, and Jade is just for evasion. Diamond Flask gives you 100% crit chance. With an extra crit on it, it's 134% crit chance. And then Sulfur is 40% increased damage and 70% attack speed. Roll these suffixes, I would recommend. You want stuff that's going to make a massive difference to your damage, especially if you're running a budget build. I rolled all these with just alterations. They were not expensive to do. So if we untick the flasks, it goes down to 4.4 million DPS. So we get a ridiculous boost from each flask. So this gives us 18%. If we just tick that on its own, this gives us 21%. So we're going to put these flasks up. And that's what your mapping DPS is going to be like. I have all my flasks on use and reach full because I want this to be a one-button build. Now, obviously, you are going to be squishy. So I've unticked Steel Skin. So this is what you will be like mapping. It looks squishy, but for mapping, you very rarely get hit for 8,000 fizz. Also, you are going to be freezing everything, and you've got an 83% chance to evade. If you manage to get the Watcher's Eye with the increase on it, you're going to have 90%. So it may seem like this is a squishy build, but it isn't. As soon as you hit something, you freeze pretty much the entire screen. You're not going to be able to go into farming juiced invitations on this setup because it's only going to cost you a few divines. But you could do pretty much any map strategy you wanted other than max deli, and you're going to have no problems whatsoever. So I've put this budget POB into the video description along with my POB. But we'll just bring up my path of building because there is still a lot I can do with the build to min-max, which I'm going to be doing. So the first thing is these nodes here. They're basically nodes I take because I want to make gearing easier. If you drop these nodes, I don't have strength, I don't have intelligence, and I don't have the mana to use my skill. It's fixable. I just need to get better attributes on my gear and find mana on some gear. Or spend some more money, stick my lighting up to level 4, and that then makes it much more viable. So that'll give me 2 more points. I'd then carry in 5 ways, or however people get XP now, to get up to 97. That allows me to fit a medium cluster jewel in, which is going to increase the damage even more. I can obviously increase my gems to 2120, so we'd get this up to 5, 2120 here, 2120, 2120. And then stuff like Herald of Ice, Hatred, we can push up to 20, Grace, 21, all across the board there. That then boosts my damage up to that. So let's say we were level 97, and we're going to add a cluster jewel in. I would always go crit, just because this assumes Assassin's Mark, and Assassin's Mark is only on rare or unique enemies. So basically, the go-to one is Basics of Pain, and then pressure points. This doesn't really matter because you're only going to take 1 node anyway. So then we can add this jewel in. So then my damage is up to 18.8 million. My claw, as I said, could definitely be better. I think if I bought a meta claw, that's going to push it to 22, 23 million. I can also drop Vile Haste, drop Ancestral Protect. Actually, we could use both. I'll drop Vile Haste. I'll then run I'm not going to bother with the dual totem setup, but I would run Protector and Ancestral War Chief, and that's then 22 million damage with an extra claw, easily up to 26, 28 million. Then I'm still not sure we'll be able to freeze Uber bosses, but that's kind of what I'm looking to do. And then I'll probably look to get a corrupted pair of Legacy of Fury with just something that's helpful. And just try and get our damage pushed up to about 30 million burst DPS. And then I think it's even more comfy, but it doesn't need it. It only needs it because I do want to beat the feared and I do want to have a go at Uber bosses, even if it means I have to take out Trinity, put another gem in because we're not getting freeze. Whatever it is, I just want to find a way to do it on this build. But that's it for this video. If I have missed anything, please ask questions in the comments. Until next time, take care and see you in the next video.